The countdown.
10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5, 4, 3,
2,
1, 0.
At least you always know where you stand with Pops. So I like that about him. He's not passive aggressive. He's not sneaky that way. He'll give it to you straight down both barrels.
Well, greetings and salutations all. I am Pops. Good morning. It is interesting to be able to do an early morning show for me. I'm usually able to do things only in the evenings. We're able to do something a little earlier today because we got our schedules to align. Get to have Andy Masterson with us. Thank you, Andy, for joining me.
Thanks for having
folks,
me.
I've been so blessed by and just wowed by his work, and I've been kind of, chasing down interviews he's done and things like that, kind of get exposed. I said, well, I'm just going to reach out, see if we can get our schedules to line up. You made my world, Andy, when you had made the, I kind of included in the thumbnail there where you could see the figures for Neurotic and Doomcock and Ass and that kind of thing. So before we got to that a little bit, what did you do as a trade to even develop sort of a skill set for this? Or how did you kind of get down this avenue where you found this love of sculpting?
Well, I was an art major it started in high school. The high school I went to, we had a vocational program. So there was a commercial art course, and it was 3 periods a day for 2 years. So that started me off. And then when I went into college, I took my art classes, changed my major a couple times. And just kind of settled on art, and it's always been there. And then sculpting, the first thing I ever sculpted was it was sort of like a 10-inch Spawn figure that just to see if I could do it. It was just like, playing around a little bit, I made a wire armature and just kind of built off with some Sculpey and painted it up. Unfortunately, it fell off of a shelf one day and died. Didn't respawn, but so then I when my son was born back in '99, I started collecting him 12-inch Star Wars figures from Hasbro. And so to keep up on the releases, I would follow along in some of the forums that were out there, the website forums, and there was discussion there about customizing. And when I was a kid, I was lucky enough to have like every toy imaginable. I'm the youngest of 4 brothers, so as my brothers outgrew their toys, I would inherit them. So I had quite a selection to choose from. And so when my son was born, it was like, all right, I'm going to get him as much stuff as he can play with. So following along in these forums, they talked about like how to make actual head sculpts and customize a figure so you could put like a different head on a body and so forth and make a custom figure. So I sculpted his head and I put it on an action figure, and I took an Anakin Skywalker body, popped the head off and put his on it and dressed him up in his favorite color is blue. So made him some like little blue Jedi robes, and he was able to run around with his Obi-Wan Kenobi with his own figure. Then as my daughter got older, she wanted one of herself. So I made, she had Jedi iron. So she was running around with, and she had a lot of fun with her. She liked to do stuff where we would tie strings up and she would just have her toy kind of swing across because she would watch Dora the Explorer all the time. And so she would be like swinging on vines and stuff. And it just sort of went from there. I had a few friends that were into collecting and stuff. So I worked on, doing some sculptures for them. And over the years, I've learned what were some of the better ways to do things and some were the worst ways to do things, and somewhere in between, picking up a little, some tips and tricks along the way. And then when the whole pandemic hit, I had some extra time on my hands. So I discovered Doomcock. I had YouTube on, and here's this, crazy guy in the helmet, talking about Star Wars and how it's gone downhill, like right after Last Jedi. And I grew up I was 10 years old when the first movie came out. What's A New Hope now, and so watching them kind of destroy it was very, especially since it was something my son and I really connected with. It was very frustrating to me. I was like, wow, somebody feels the same way that I do. And that introduced me to, like, with Doomcock and Gary were doing their stream together on Sundays. And then that introduced me to that area, and I kind of, like, spread off into that. So, like, I figured, I heard these guys talking about collectibles and action figures. Like, hey, I could probably make an action figure of these guys. They'd probably get a kick out of it. So the first thing I started off with was Doomcock, and trying to figure out a way to. I knew I could sculpt the helmet, and my daughter, when she was in Girl Scouts, like all the girls had American Girl dolls, so decided, all right, well, going to get her an American Girl doll, and so we went and got her very first American Girl doll. And you find out, like, what a racket it is.
Mm.
And they sell the clothes, and they sell, like, furniture and all kinds of stuff at outrageous prices. And I've always been the kind of person who, if I look at something, I'm like, I hate paying for something that I could do myself. Like, I repair my own cars most of the time. I do my own construction around the house. I built an obstacle course in my garage with the rock climbing walls and stuff like that, just because I can do it. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, wow, they want like $50 for, like, this American Girl doll dress. Like, so I learned how to sew, and that was probably from my mom. Like, I grew up with Depression era parents, and so it was learn how to do these things for yourself. I was like 13 years old. My mom was teaching me how to cook. She said, here, I'm teaching you how to cook because I'm not cooking for you anymore. Here's how you do your wash because I'm not doing your wash anymore. And here, like, you need your clothes repaired. Here's a sewing machine, and here's how you use it because I'm not doing it. So I kind of took those skills and put them to work, and a lot of trial and error, and taking things apart, and like, you would take a GI Joe shirt, like, take the seams out and lay it down on a piece of paper, trace it out, and cut out your own and try and sew it back together. And a lot of trial and error. I've gotten half decent at it. I wouldn't say I'm really anything spectacular with it, but it's passable is what I'll say.
I think it's more than passable. I think it's fantastic. But let me go back to something you started with, because my first experience with anything like this was just custom paint jobs on action figures in college. I had someone who would they kept changing Daredevil's costume and things like that in, like, the 90s, and they would take a figure and just repaint it. I was like, man, that's really fascinating. I just didn't have that skill set. It was just really fascinating. Someone spending their spare time doing that kind of thing. So that was my first exposure to that. And then I was like you, it's like this journey of how the pandemic changed everything, listening to YouTube more often, finding like-minded folks that share a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think for me, I don't know about you, but Gary says it a lot. I know others say it, but he really was like, you got a voice, just say your stuff, man. Tell them how you feel. Like, don't worry about saying something I've already said. If you feel the same way, they need to hear that more and more people feel the same way. And I found that so encouraging. You seem like you did too, but your creative outlet was just a little bit different. But it seemed like you were very inspired by their message, so to speak.
Well,
you do a YouTube channel too now, and you're kind of, you may look at it as more of just passing the time or sharing with people a little bit, but I think it's also it's almost like your expression in a lot of ways.
Well, what I do, like, as a career, it's all about helping people and helping them to achieve their potential. So as a martial arts instructor, I deal with a lot of people who are over 40. So getting them to realize that they're not so limited as they would think. you get a lot of people that think that there are a lot of things that are so far above them, it's just not possible. And getting them to change that mindset into one of first, yes, these things are possible to do, and second, here let's design a pathway that you can kind of follow that will lead you to that to surpass your perceived limitations. And
Okay.
it's the same kind of thing where a lot of people think that like, well, I could never possibly create things like that. Like, really, if you look at stories of great literature and especially great 20th century literature, like, if you look at Hemingway, Hemingway was great at taking sort of like mundane everyday life and making it interesting, making it sort of something that was intriguing. And everybody has a story like that. Everybody has, a point of view and their life experience that, if it's put down the right way and told the right way, it can be fascinating. And it can inspire people to have a different point of view. And I think as a society, we've gotten to this point where everything has just gotten to be so spoon-fed, where we want immediate gratification. We want that. I'm a fan of old movies, and there used to be a subtext in movies. There used to be an implication of things that were happening that weren't necessarily shown on screen. Like you could put
Yep.
something up there and it was just implied that something was happening. Well, if you put that to a modern audience and you say like, yeah, this is the scene where like Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman are like, they just, came back out in the living room, and like, well, that never happened. Like, well, they're not going to show those things, but you can kind of read between the lines. And today, if the audience isn't explicitly shown something, they don't perceive that it happened. Their attention span is moving so fast, they don't look at the space in between what you see. And I think it's a cause and effect kind of thing where, number one, they've been spoon-fed everything, where we're just going to show you everything that you need to know about the story, and it's done, and it's consumed and it's discarded. If you look at, I always refer to the $5 bin at Walmart, where you have all these movies just piled up in there that you could spend an hour just getting through the first half of looking at what's in there. And when you think about how many Academy Award winning movies are in there for $5, and it shows you how much people don't rewatch things. Like the things that people will rewatch are very, very rare. And like those of us that grew up in like sort of a nerdy culture, and we were the ones that were like, we were shunned because we like these things. I was the comic book nerd. I was like, the Star Wars nerd. I was like, I wasn't the popular kid. And these franchises were a refuge. It was like, there were great stories. And now you come along, you fast forward like, 40 years later, and it's become, it's a hip thing. Like, you see all
cool.
the guys that were in high school, like on the football team, wearing like Star Wars shirts and superhero shirts. You're like, wait a second, like now you're realizing that these are actually good stories, and to have them sort of like, all right, yeah, but now it's not for you anymore. It's like, we're going to take it over. And it's like, it's almost like being bullied all over again. It's like, I'm going to take your lunch money and I'm going to go spend it on myself. It's like, I'm going to go take your passion and I'm going to make it more for me. And there's a considerable amount of frustration that goes along with that. And so a lot of the YouTube crowd here is sort of is giving voice to people who, again, don't realize that they can have an impact, that their voice matters. It's like when my old job, I worked in a supermarket for 17 years. And one of the things that you learn is that the customer up front at the desk yelling at your customer service person there is not your worst customer. The biggest problem you have is the customer that has a full shopping cart there and they push it off to the side and they walk out the door and don't say a thing.
Yep.
Because the vocal person will tell you what the problem is. The other person, you have no idea why they left. So you don't
I'll
know
never go back. Yep. I'll never go back. Yep.
And that's it's a good thing and a bad thing about like what we have with YouTube. Because we are telling the seller, who are, you know, the Warner Brothers, the Disneys, the Lucasfilm, we're telling them what the problem is. And they're sitting there saying like, no, that's not the problem. You're the problem. And like, okay, so I'll go and put my money elsewhere.
Yeah.
And instead of going and buying a new Superman figure, maybe somebody would want like, hey, you know what? I'm spending more time watching YouTube people. So I'm going to go buy their t-shirts. I'm going to go buy a Drunk 3PO t-shirt. I'm going to go buy a Nerdrotic coffee. I'm going to go buy a quartering, you know, hat or whatever.
Yep.
And it's changing. It's like, and I think it's only a matter of time. And you see what Eric July's doing, creating his own comic book universe. I think he's one of the people that are going to say, you know what, I'm going to make this, and it's going to fill in that space like Ethan Van Sciver does with his Cyberfrog.
Yep.
He goes along and he's creating his own, saying like, you know, whereas people always used to think like, well, you can't do that because it's just like you need the printing companies, you need all that. Now you don't.
It was
like
cost prohibitive and limited distribution. And well, I spoke to James Mealy last night. I had an interview with him, and he deals in comic book art, and he kind of talked about one of the effects of what you were just saying, and that is the new comic books are so terrible. There's been years and years of this, basically a decade, and the complaints have been rendered. People are talking. Your boy Zach's made a career on YouTube basically pointing out excruciating details that are wrong with some of these things and the patterns, and it was all basically ignored. So when the pandemic happened, people just went, well, I'll just buy back issues. So some of the back issues was what got these stores through, and some of the prices got crazy because people were like, well, I want to read that. I've never read this. I've never read that. I think that also fed into some of the YouTube craze too, because you had creators, and I really should have been on YouTube during that time, because like I share your passion too. And, you know, Gary, I think we're all very similar in age. We're only a few years apart. And it's like we grew up with this, you know, comic book bin searches where we're looking for random comic books and reading just everything because you were just a consumer. And because we were kind of alienated from our, you know, typical social life stereotypes, we immersed ourselves even deeper into some of these different genres and things like that. So you sound very black-pilled of not having a lot of hope and that kind of thing. Is there a tipping point, do you see, where one of them may be ahead of the others as far as waking up a little bit? Do you think maybe the Warner Brothers Zaslav thing is a little further along that scale of, hey, listen, you guys have lost way too many customers. You don't have any plan at all. I mean, what are your thoughts on kind of where we are, the temperature of the room, so to speak?
I think the problem that I saw this. I used to work for, when I started off, my first year in college, like my parents got divorced when I was a senior in high school. And so there was a whole lot of uncertainty there. So I took a year off and I went back to school, and I was paying for everything myself. And it was 1986. I had just turned 19. And 4th of July weekend, and a friend of mine and me we stopped off at a McDonald's, and my first bite of my quarter pounder with cheese knocked the filling loose. My second bite split a tooth in half. I was off my mom's insurance policy. My dentist was closed because of the holiday. And I couldn't afford an emergency room, so I popped out my pocket knife and proceeded to remove what was left of my tooth. in the parking lot of McDonald's. And it was at that point I realized, you know what, I need a job that has health insurance. So I started working overnight at a supermarket because, like, my first semester in college, I took night classes, and there I am, 18 years old, taking night classes, and everyone in there was ancient, like 30. You know, there's
Careful.
like, there's no pretty girls to talk to. There's like, you know,
Nope.
yeah, I look back now, it's like I see a 30-year-old, and I'm like, yeah, he's a kid. And I'm saying to myself, I've got to get into some daytime classes. So I started working overnight at a supermarket, and then both my parents got diagnosed with cancer. And so I'm running back and forth between, like, I'm working full time, going to school full time. My dad's got cancer, my mom's got cancer. So, like, and we're me and my brother, my one brother, moved in with my grandmom to take care of her, so my mom didn't have to worry about her. And 91, my dad died. 7 months later, my mom died. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a semester off from school. I haven't been back yet. But that's how I got into, like, just working in a supermarket. Like, it was just, you know, and then I got promoted and became a manager. And I was like, and it wasn't until, like, you know, my teacher asked me to take over the school for him that I changed careers. But I worked for the oldest supermarket company in the world. It was A&P. And at one point, they had over 3,000 stores. And when you have a company like that and you tank it, because they went bankrupt about 6-7 years ago, and it takes talent to crash a company that big. It's not accidental. And what would happen is you would get somebody in there that would start to make inroads, and they would start to change things to where it needed to be. But then you had the old mindset of people in there that would, all right, yeah, we're getting things going in that direction. And then they would quietly steer it right back into the same rut where it was at before. And I think that that's the problem where we're at with entertainment. You may get a Zaslav coming in there, but unless they change hands and, like, completely change all of your staff, it's like Star Wars. You know, we have, like, Pablo Hidalgo there, who was, you know, working under George Lucas as this little archive guy and stuff like that. And he stayed, and he sort of, like, poisoned things with, like, you know, I mean, here's a guy who, like, has no idea how good he's got it. Okay. He's a nerdy little guy who has his, basically his dream job. Like, he's working for Lucasfilm, this thing that he supposedly loves. And, like, and now, but he gets full of himself. And he goes and laughs at a guy for crying on screen about, like, you know, the reemergence of Luke Skywalker in the way that Luke Skywalker should be. And you can get rid of everybody else, but if they're still there, you're still going to get the same attitude. You really would have to clean house. Now, what I see as the bigger problem is that who do you replace these people with?
Sure.
Your writing staff that you have, they're all coming from the same institutions. They're being hired by people that, like, you know, I went to this school, so I'm going to hire people that, like, we used to look, you know, real diversity was diversity of thought. It was like, I'm going to hire somebody who's not like me. If you look at the comic book industry, if you looked at, like, Steve Ditko, Stan Lee, and Jack Kirby, very, very different personalities. And that's what made it, like, if you look at the X-Men in their heyday, what made it so great was that Chris Claremont and John Byrne hated each other. And that interplay back and forth with them provided some great material. Now you've got this hive mind where people, they only hire clones of themselves, and they put these people in positions, and they just kind of push through it. And they've lost touch with, like, we look at the like the comic book industry, for example. You say, well, you know, people stop reading comic books. Like, no, people stop reading comic books because, like, the material you put out stunk. And if you look at the manga sales, they're huge. Well, where do you think those readers came from? Where do you think that they were comic book fans? So there's an appetite for it.
Yeah.
So until these things actually burn down, I don't see it changing. I don't see. You may make some inroads back and forth. You may get a we hear all the rumors that like Bob Chapek really wants to change things, and maybe he does. But there's such an infrastructure in there of people that are more concerned about like putting out their particular message than making a good story. And what's really sad is that if, being an art major on the East Coast, you are surrounded by marginalized people of like, gay people and like, and nerdy people and like, people with peculiar tastes and things like that. And it becomes very, very normal. And one thing that you find really quickly is that the perception that people have of like our, fringe people, the mainstream tends to look at us like we're not normal. We're not like, but we are. We're like, we're people just like everybody else. And especially nowadays, they like to lock people into a hive mind where it's like, if you click this box, you automatically have to go this way. And I remember a very good friend of mine in college had no idea the guy was gay. And we found out it was no big deal. Got irritated with him one time when, we were all out at a bar and we were commiserating about girlfriends and stuff like that. And he comes along, he's listening for a few minutes. He says, the difference between me and you guys is like, that I don't have to sit there and cuddle somebody after I can just like, like you jerk off. Like it's like a little bit of envy there about like, yeah, you get the best of both worlds kind of thing. It's like, it's the scene from As Good as It Gets where like Jack Nicholson says, buddy, if that did it for me, I'd be the luckiest guy in the world. But like, we had this conversation about like the activism and how he said to me, the difference between people like me and people like, these activists out there, he said, I'm comfortable with myself. I have no problem being who I am. And all I want is to not get hassled for it. But these people, these activists are so upset that they're not like everybody else, that they weren't comfortable being an individual. So they wanted everybody to be like them. So therefore they'd be normal. And that's where we're at with this. It's like, you're this constant bombardment of like, but people's tastes are always going to be what their tastes are. Like,
Sure.
And until you look at people as individuals and you start to see things like, everybody is different. Like if you look closely enough and you're starting to see these things eat their own now, like, they've allied themselves with each other, but they find out that they have fundamental differences because that's what happens with individuals. It's like now until this starts to change and until the people that are inside these massive conglomerates of thought start to break up and say, hey, you know what? You're not speaking for me.
Yeah.
That's what's going to have to make it change. So the black pill thing, I think it's going to be, you're really going to have to see somebody get eclipsed where the Disneys are really going to have to fail. Like, you're going to have to see them like start selling things off. And for that to happen, you need the normies to kind of wake up and say like, because if you talk to a comic book fan, they can tell you why they don't like a comic book. But the normie doesn't know why they don't like it because they don't analyze it that much. They're not that familiar with it. They watch it and they're like, I don't know, I just didn't like it. But like you talk to one of us and we'll sit here and we'll have these discussions for hours about why Spider-Man isn't really Spider-Man. And it's like, how he did something that was very un-Peter Parker-like. The normie just kind of looks at it like, I don't know, there's just something off about it. All right, I'm going to go get something to eat. So
Very
until that
simplistic.
changes and people have had enough of it. Now, my fear, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mr. Grant Gregory, big fan of yours, just come in here to say hey and hail to you, man. He loves your work, loves your stuff. And let me try to summarize, I think, of what you're trying to get at. There was a principle that I learned when I was doing political writing back a while ago. I think it was like one of these, I don't know, I was responsible for covering what was happening on some of these radio shows like Hugh Hewitt or Dennis Prager and things like that. Not really Limbaugh per se, but some of the other ones. And it was like somebody said the problem with the agenda was that it can't be They're going to sell you on tolerance, but it's not about tolerance. It's about acceptance, which is used to move you towards celebration and promotion.
Mhm.
So if you don't celebrate and promote, you're the bigot. It's not about tolerance. There is no live and let live. And I think the problem that we're going to run into, I think, is what you're trying to get at is, okay, let's just assume Zaslav has good intentions at Warner Brothers Discovery, because I think that's the one that's probably farthest down the road. But does he have the guts to purge whole departments of those individuals? Because they've like you said, they've hired each other. They're all friends. They're all like-minded. There's even the X-Men thing, you brought that up, and I think it was so true that even like one of these digital Comic-Cons they had during the pandemic, it was like an X-Men panel of them all as a group, not, well, I work on this title, here's how I approach it, or here's how I work on this title, here's how I approach it. It was like, no, we collectively decide all of this together, not we want our stories to line up. It was like, this is one giant message, and anything that's not part of that is unacceptable. And I think what you're trying to say is, does anybody have the guts? And the money has to get a lot worse than it is right now. I told everybody, I've been disheartened. I don't know about you, but Doctor Strange went over $900 million, and I found it so disheartening that so much money was made off that movie, because I found so many things wrong with it. I'm like, well, that won't teach them anything. I guess we'll have to keep going. That didn't wake anybody up.
Well, that's the thing about an empty shelf in the supermarket. There's two ways to look at it. It's look how many I sold, or yeah, but how many more could you have sold? Now, if you looked at Endgame and Infinity War, there's no reason that they should not have been able to maintain that level of success. Star Wars really exemplifies this stuff more so than anything else, because Howard Chan, who's the president of Hot Toys, has said they will never ever produce another figure from the sequel trilogy because they didn't sell.
Yeah.
The other day on Twitter, I got a notification from Sideshow about like things that they had on sale. Like, there's a Captain Marvel's figure on there that they just reduced in free shipping, and they're trying to persuade people to buy this thing. That came out in 2019. It was like, and it still hasn't sold. And you look at all of the other figures that are completely sold out, and there's wait lists for them, and that's sitting on the shelf collecting dust. And
yeah, I saw a Captain Marvel figure from the movie in an Ollie's just like a month ago. In an Ollie's, Ollie's is like worse than clearance. It's like literally like it keeps going and going. Ends up at Ollie's, and I always find it fascinating what will end up there. And it's always something like that. Usually, the figures that end up there are like not even the secondary characters. It's like the third-rate characters of a big budget project like that. But no, it's a title character. There's like 6 or 8 of them there. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, she's so popular, the most popular character in their library.
If I had the talent to do that kind of, because I made comic books and things, but if I had the talent, I have the ideas, but I don't have the talent to get it done. I would really love to make a Toy Story kind of thing about the Toy Story story taking place in a landfill, you know, with a pile of Captain Marvel figures arguing with themselves about, like, you know, why the buying public was like, you know, nobody just realizes how great these figures were as they're sitting in a landfill. Like, you know, oh my God, I can't believe these people were just like so stupid. They threw me out. They just don't appreciate, like, you know, and yet here they are in like the landfill and have like a G.I. Joe character come up, like with a figure come up with like, it's missing an arm. And it's like, you know, like, I know why I was thrown away, but you people don't know why you were thrown away.
Yeah. That would be a really funny, like a little short. You could probably get some people to help you out doing a little 3-minute clip or a little short with that kind of, because I think that would be great, because you could include other characters like what's her name, Rose Tika or whatever from the new trilogy, and you could get 3 or 4 of these things together that would work like that. Well, Gab Stargate's up in here. Boy, we should get Gab Stargate to show off his toys. You talk about somebody as a connoisseur. He's saying hey to everybody, so that's cool. So what are you showing off there?
Making some of my look. I have Orange Flash.
Oh, okay.
And look, he's got, like, you know, with Choco-Bitch action, like, you know, and here's Ezra Miller in his prison jumpsuit.
That's great. Look at Ezra Miller with his little bowl cut haircut and his orange jumpsuit. That's great.
It's like you know you have to mock these things. You have to like it and that's where like the why they hate the YouTube community is like they can't stand the criticism. They're very thin skinned, and that's really part of the creative process. Like as an art major, you have to learn really quick to not take it personally when somebody criticizes your work. It's like, all right, it might be a valid criticism that your stuff just wasn't that good. If you're smart, it will motivate you to make yourself better. Or you can pout and say like, no, you're just too stupid to appreciate my work. Or you can be in denial and just say, no, my mom says that my stuff is great and I'm going to stay right where I'm at. But if you're not moving forward, and trying to improve yourself, you're limiting yourself with it. And
do you think that's compounded? Do you think that's compounded by the fact that there's so much self-insertion of themselves in some of their work? I mean, Sana Amanat is clearly Miss Marvel, right? There's not even like a gray area there. What's her name? Gabby Rivera is clearly America Chavez. I mean, there's not even it's almost part of their pride in the creation process. Is I'm putting myself in there. That when you do criticize the story and or the character to say, well, the character's kind of behaving like a villain here and the character's this, you are insulting them personally because they've inserted themselves in it. That almost compounds the problem that you're saying where you have the denial syndrome of the artist. I grew up with a friend. He was part of a website. It was one of my first gigs doing this kind of stuff. And he did these sort of like slashy indie film horror things. And he was always put off that I didn't like them. And I'm like, I just don't see a market for it. I think you're just wasting your time. And I'm not trying to say that you can't get better. I'm just trying to say I don't think that's a market. I don't see the market for this. Well, I don't care about the market. I'm like, well, then you're just a starving artist. Like you have to feed a market, find a need, fill a need, right? It's like there's a time and place for balancing that with your artistic. Like even doing YouTube, if you want to make the weirdest, craziest videos that no one ever watches, more power to you. But what's your end goal? And I think that when you have these big corporations spending so much time and energy and money on people who don't even care about a customer base or what their customers have to say, it's just doomed for failure. And yeah. And you found such a great niche with the stuff that you're working on. I want to kind of circle back a little bit because you have these great figures behind you of Strange and Spidey and that kind of thing. So what drives the agenda to get on your radar screen for what figures get done? Like are you taking commissions or how does this work? I didn't want to get too far away from your incredible journey because that's what I want to kind of get back to.
Well, I don't have a game plan so much as like I see something, I feel an inspiration to it.
Okay.
There's no figure that I've created that I hadn't had some kind of twist to that I wanted to put out there. So, for example, there's motivation behind things like, the first two I made were like, I did the Doomcock figure.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did the Nerdrotic figure because they had that little team up thing that they were doing for a while. And that was the show that I would watch. And the next one that I did was like, because I usually work late, so I don't get to see like the Friday Night Tight show. I usually catch like maybe an hour of it or something like that. And then I happened to turn it on one day, and there was Az wearing this hot dog suit. So I'm like, you know what? That would be really funny to make. Like, so I sent him out like so. I had no intention of anything like this happening. In fact, I made the Doomcock figure and I put his address on it. And like, all I did was I put my name and return address on the thing just to mail it. And I just sent it off. And I, was like, and I'm at the gym and I hear him talk about this, like, you guys want to see the Doomcock action figure. And he goes on this like, 40-minute like, thing. I'm like, and so what I did with him was, I made the action figure, and he's got like I found a little squirrel figurine, and I painted it up like Sabu, and I made a bad robot from J.J. Abrams' company, and I fashioned that out of styrene, and like I put had him hanging on this little torture device. So it was like kind of like the scene in Return of the Jedi where they're torturing the droids and ripping them apart.
Yep.
So he had this little robot hanging there, and so I sent him a super chat to let him know that it lights up. I went and got this little tea light, this electric tea light from Walmart, and I cannibalized and put it in there, so it was flickering, so like it looked like he was broken. He was just hanging there. So next thing he's got me on the show, and like the next day, like after I mailed off his figure, I mailed off Gary's figure. But then I didn't realize that Gary takes months to check his PO box.
Right.
So I made the Az figure with and I put a hot dog suit with it. So he had this thing there where he was like, you know, unboxing and he's like, look, here's this hot dog suit, and look in his face, he was just tickled pink with it. And I didn't put any other thought into things until like then the Zack Snyder thing happened with Geeks and Gamers, and I was like, yeah, that's pretty shitty of like the guy to do. And I, like I said, I really wasn't following a lot of these guys that much. And then I heard Anna, that Star Wars girl, like, you know, she made a video called In Defense of Geeks and Gamers, where she was talking about everything Jeremy did to help her when her sister passed away. And I was like, you know what? I want to do something for this guy, like as a universe saying thank you to him for being a good person. So I made him like this like a green, like with the Geeks and Gamers colors, like a Kelly green. And I took the Geeks and Gamers logo and I turned it on the side and ran it up and down the tabard, so it looked like just like a design. And I made him a Jedi figure with a little Donald Trump as Yoda figure to go along with it. And then the next thing I did was Drunk 3PO. And when I found out like all the charity work that he had done, it was like, you know, again, the universe needs to say thank you to this guy. So he was like, you know, the Mandalorian centered around there, the Gina Carano thing. This is right before, you know, they had fired her and whatnot. So what I did was I created a Mandalorian figure with his head on it, but I took an old C-3PO Hasbro figure and I molded the body so his armor looked like C-3PO's chest piece and all that.
Right.
Painted it gold and everything, and sent him along with a Gonk droid that's a beer cooler, you know, so the whole Drunk 3PO thing with the Mandalorian. And I made the box that says the Drunkalorian. And forget like what I did next. It was either like
did you make more than one of any of these? I mean, I know you have one, so obviously you made a couple. I mean, I assume once it started happening, people were reaching out immediately. Go, can I get one? I mean, it has to be what happened. There's too many thousands of people watching these guys to not have just the law of numbers. Even if it's just a few per person, that would add up very quickly. Is that pretty much what happened?
There are a lot of people that want them, but I won't sell these unless they get an okay from the creator.
Gotcha.
It's not my place to like, you know, my biggest concern was like, look, there's a lot of people that love these guys and there's a lot of people that hate them. And like I was taken aback when on the Doomcock show when like the entire chat's lighting up like, I want one, take my money, and all this. I'm like, I can't, like, I mean, the Doomcock figures, like there's 225 rivets that go on the jacket there that have to be put on by hand. It's very, very time consuming. Now I've put out to several of the creators out there, look, you've got a lot of fans that want these things. And I sent them things out there, like proposals about here's how much all the materials cost. Like for each action figure, there's about $100 worth of materials in it for me when I make one. And it's odd because it doesn't seem like it would be that much, but it's all the little things that all add up with it.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I haven't heard anything back from them. Like, you know, and I tell people, like, look, if you want these things, you're going to have to pester these guys. I can't produce a whole lot, but I can produce some, like, you know, that. And there's people out there that want, like, they want a set of the Friday Night Tights crew. There's people that want, like, you know, the Doomcock figure and the Harvey figure and all that. There's people that everybody's fan base has somebody that wants a representation of their favorite creators.
But I think you're right that there would have to be a pause by that creator to know. That means you also could have a hater that buys one who wants to set it on fire for a video, or who wants to turn you into some parody or actually something that's very offensive. So they would have to know that, you know, just like we see stuff with, you know, mainstream action figures, the same would happen with them. And they're actually like people. This is something you need to make a decision about. Like, you know, you put yourself out there. And so I can definitely see your pause there of trying to be, listen, I made these kind of because I'm a fan, not because I was trying to create a market, but there is a market. Right. You have to decide how to move forward because it is your likeness. Got it. Okay.
Well, that's the thing. Like they have, each of these guys has subscribers to their channels that are high tier. They're paying like $25 a month to follow them.
Yep.
If you got a guy who's done like a full year or 2 years of paying you $25 a month, I think you're pretty safe with the idea that that guy's not going to take your likeness and have him defiled by a Ken doll behind you. Like, so,
right.
That was sort of my criteria with like, you know, as I approach some of these guys, because like I get every one of these like little appearances I do, I get like, I never had a Twitter account like until that night with Doomcock. He's like, do you have a Twitter? Because he had me on a show that night. I was like, no idea how to do any of this stuff, right? So I made a Twitter account, and all of a sudden I started getting all these DMs about like, you know, can I get one of these things? I'm like, you got to go through him. And then like the thing that really blew me up was with Chrissy Mayer wanted a Hunter Biden action figure. And
oh yeah, her stuff is amazing. And actually, my favorite is her as Frost, but you included the filing cabinet. The filing cabinet is what broke me, Andy. That you would think about the filing Frank the filing cabinet made my day. I actually couldn't stop thinking about that for hours later. Like how that's just the best, because the accessories is really what kind of, you know, we always, you know, we all have Spider-Man action figures or whatever, but every now and again you'd get some cool accessories and some different things. And as a kid, you always lost the accessories. Like you were like a kid, it's like, where's my lightsaber? Where's the little pistol? Where's the, yeah. So that's the best.
When I made Mexican Iron Man's Darth Pappy figure, I dressed him in this Sith outfit with these like Mexican style cowboy boots. And his Sith outfit looks, you know, it's very Mexican inspired, and with some like, you know, little like Aztec designs and stuff on it. But I put him on a speeder bike, and on the back of the speeder bike is a little droid that cooks tacos. So it, like, it put a, you know, dark side tacos on the flag that kind of goes on top of the speeder bike.
Oh man!
So it's like, to me, it's those are the things that make it like. So a friend of mine said to me, like, you know, aren't you concerned that like, you know, people are going to like, you know, because that was the day I put out the Hunter Biden figure. It was like, it was October 13th. October 14th, there was a video out there that some woman took, and she took a Ken doll, repainted it, and taped some underwear on it with a scarf, and like copied exactly like what I did with the Hunter Biden figure. And she's like, you know, but it was nowhere near like, you know, it was just a Ken doll. Like, you know, I sculpted his likeness and everything like that. And it was like, I'm like, really? Like, you know, I'm not an arrogant person, but I'm like, you know, you can at least try a little bit. Like, it's like, that's the Wish version, the wish.com version. So somebody said to me, like, aren't you concerned that somebody else is going to do this? I'm like, yeah, no, not really. Because like, you know, the thing that sets my stuff apart is like the little things I add with it. When I did Ryan's figure, these guys are always playing Mario Kart. So I made him a little droid. It was a pizza oven droid that was painted up to look just like Mario, and like you'd open it up and he would have little pizzas in there and stuff. So that was, you know, something unique for that one. Every one of these things I throw in something unique. Like Jay's figure had the Gonk droid beer cooler, but I also sent him baby Admiral Akbar with a little aquarium, and he had like the little play blocks that kids play with, the alphabet on it, and it spelled trap on it. Those like, you know, stuck there. And
but there were always knockoffs, right? I mean, I actually just recently was looking at original. Was it Star Wars or what? Battlestar Galactica. Anyway, it was like the amount of money people. I think it was Star Wars. The knockoff figures that were made when we were kids from South America and all these other countries. It's like, it's so funny, but there's also like people will pay hundreds of dollars for these crazy things because they're just that rare.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. At some point, someone might try to make a few figures that are similar to this, whatever. But you're doing this as sort of like a tribute to the people that you're a fan of. It really has kind of got to have a way to work through the likeness rules and those kinds of things to kind of move forward. So what about doing something that you could do your own? Like maybe you do 12 of something that you would feel comfortable with selling or something like that. Is that kind of in the, have you developed any sort of business plan for doing this kind of stuff to as sort of like a side hustle, or is there something? That would be the thing I guess I would see is like, well, I want to get to likeness issues with them. So maybe I could create characters or find somebody who would want to, collaborate or something. But I don't know what's
the main thing that I'm doing with this is I've made so many friends in this whole YouTube sphere. And it's to me, it's about like, when you see somebody like, creative people tend to undervalue themselves tremendously, and we do things, and it's like, because we can do it. Like I have a friend of mine, and he builds dioramas, and we actually have somebody who's he built this Final Fantasy VII bar. And he built this thing, and I sent pictures to one of the YouTube guys who was like blown away by this thing. He's like, I want to buy one. So I said this guy, and he's like, well, why would somebody want to do this? Why don't they just do it themselves? I'm like, I said, you think it's easy because you know how to do it. The people that don't know how to do it are like, I could never do this. And we tend to undervalue ourselves as creatives. But like for me, the best effect that I get is when you see somebody's face light up when they're opening one of these things up. And it's kind of like cat's kind of out of the bag now. The first few of these things that I made was great because nobody knew who I was. And like, so they open this thing up and it's like, holy crap, this is really neat. And now they see my name on a package and they know what's coming. So some of that surprise is gone, but still, like, and when they see that thing and they open it up and it's like, and there's a certain level of like, it's
Christmas morning.
Yeah. And to me, that I could give that to somebody. That's like, so
yeah.
I'm not really looking like, I would love to be able to make these things for some of the fans that like him. Because there's so many people out there that want like a Doomcock figure, that want like a Gary figure or a Jay figure or a Ryan figure or a Jeremy figure. And they want these things out there, but like, and I would love to be able to provide some of those things for them. Provided like, it's okay with those guys. So like I said, like, if they can get a hold of, their people and say, hey, can I get on a list somewhere to like, because these guys are busy. But if I can get me a list of like, 10 people that are like, all right, these are authorized that I can sell to, and I take it from there. Cause I've gone through like Doomcock has like, given me people that I get a request, I run it by him, he gives me a thumbs up, and I can do it for them. But I make it very clear that unless you've got this pattern of supporting this person for a long period of time, that because this is my work, this is something that I don't want perverted into something that's going to, be detrimental to these guys.
Sure.
That's my only criterion that I put out there for it. But
my family would freak out. My family would be like, no, we want them for ourselves. We're not sure we want people that hate you to have them, because that probably is not going to go well. So before we started, I want to finish with this, because before we started, you had this really insightful statement. We were discussing people being creative and how they don't see themselves as creative. And you made a statement about how in their own ways, everyone has some creativity. And it's interesting how they don't tap into it. Speak a little bit back to that, if you could, and share with folks some words of wisdom about, tapping into your own creativity and giving yourself credit a little bit.
Yeah, everyone has something that they do that is unique to them. And the process that brought you to that place, that's creativity. That's the thing that like gets you, that makes you. And again, it's like the creative undervaluing themselves. They think that because I can do it, anyone can do it, but that's not true. And it's like, and it's there has to be some level of awakening that goes into people and say, hey, you know what? I do have something to say, and I do have something to offer. When you have a fan of something that they look at and they have their own take on it, it doesn't mean that it's an invalid take. It might be kind of like, there's somebody out there whose favorite character in Lord of the Rings is, the third Gondorian soldier in the thing, and he just really liked but everybody has some creative potential. It's like as simple as like how much syrup they put on their pancakes, or the way that they swirl the syrup on there. It's like there's something that they do that's like that is expressing themselves. And
let me give you an example. And it'll be well documented at the end of a stream that she'll never see. So I feel pretty safe saying it and embarrassing her. My wife, because we've basically tried to give her dream. She has a farm now with all these animals and livestock. If you know anything about a farm, though, stuff breaks every day, all day, every day. Some animals breaking, the weather's breaking, something's being broken, right? We went to a friend. They had made a pool and a deck and all the extra wood we could take, which the price of wood right now is insane. So we have, some pieces are long, some pieces are short. And then we also have all these little wedges and stuff, little. And she says, we're just taking all of it. And of course he thinks she's crazy. This is trash to him, right? It was a week or two ago. We're out there, and we have the actual driveway is almost like a half mile or so, right? So you have all this fencing, and we had this one section of the fence where it had broken, and now it will no longer line up to the pole. It's off. She took this wedge and put it long ways into the post, so now you have something to screw in on the other side. Mm-hmm. So when you were describing this to me, that's the first thing that popped in my mind was my wife, and how creative three-dimensionally it is to think I can use this little wedge to do this and not have to replace an 18-foot plank right now, because that's going to cost a fortune. Right. It will still aesthetically look good unless you get up close to it and overanalyze it. And I'm thinking, man, she does not think of that as creativity, but that's what you're saying. Could you use examples about dishwashing? Use example is the practical stuff in life we don't think of as being creative, but I think you're right. I think it really is. Hidden talents are everywhere.
Yeah, and that has to be cultivated. That has to be like, I think that's like you had touched on this earlier about like the narcissism that's within these people, that they do their self-inserts. They do their like they propagate themselves out there because they're incapable of looking at themselves like, I can do this. It's like why I hate Bruce Springsteen. Okay, here's a guy who made a career and achieved the American dream by making songs about how it's impossible to achieve the American dream. It's like, I can do it because I'm special, but you poor people, you can't. So I'm going to be your champion. Like, no, like everyone can succeed. Everyone can it's what I try to get people to do is to realize that like where you're at is not where you'll stay unless you choose to stay there. Everybody can improve themselves. Everybody can work on things a little bit. Everybody can as simple as if you don't like the way that Star Wars is going, you don't have to subject yourself to it. What you can do if you still love Star Wars is you go and you buy the action figures that you like, and that represents your snapshot of when it was great. And you can immerse yourself in that little world, and it's all yours. So, like when you take, like one of the, I had made Drunk 3PO's figure with him in the outfit and stuff like that, and then there was the meme of him when he fell asleep on the couch in Vegas. Mm-hmm. So just for fun, I threw together a couch. I took the action figure with his head on. I laid it down on the couch, and it was everybody went crazy over it. And I said to him I sent it to him for Christmas, and he was like, "Oh, this is the best thing." And he's got on his live streams and stuff. It sits behind there, and something like that. You would think most people look at the fancy Star Wars figure, but he likes that one better. It's like the way that you set up your shelf and the way that you set up your scene. And this is what I'm trying to do with my little channel here, is to show people, like, here's how you do this. Like, you can make a display diorama base back here. You could take this and you can put this together like this, and you can make up your own set so that your shelf, your representation is your creativity. You can go on eBay and you can pick up, like, the Ezra Miller head. I didn't sculpt that. I bought that off of eBay. It was unpainted, and I slapped some paint on it and, like, did that. And I did another one, like, with Ron Perlman. I just, his little, he went off on Ron DeSantis about the parental rights and education bill. So I, like, made, here's
Teacher Ron.
Kindergarten teacher Ron, and, like, there's this little white van that says free candy on it, like, and here's his the little fat suit on him, and, like, and I intend on doing some other things with that, but, like, you don't have to be sculpting things. You can buy all these things yourself. I'm a big Marvel Comics fan. I'm a comic book fan. I appreciate the MCU for when it represented the characters as they were in the comic books. I appreciate that. I'm making my own, like I did Shang-Chi, which I took a Bruce Lee head sculpt and I made the outfit and stuff like that, so he looks just like he did in the comic book. I took a sculpt of Joaquin Phoenix as Joker, and I just repainted that, and that's going to be my Baron Mordo. I have the Ancient One from the comic book. So a real
Ancient One.
I found on eBay, there's this old Asian guy. I sculpted him a goatee, and I made an outfit for him. So now I have a real Ancient One, because Tilda Swinton is not my Ancient One.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let me say hi to lovely Sherry, who popped in to say hey to us both. We have to wrap up a little bit here, but let me say this, guys. You watch Andy do some of these. He's got a little library going now. Maybe he only did a couple videos at first, but now it's starting to add up. So it's great. You can kind of hear some of his thought process. I have to encourage him. He has to talk more. I want to hear more of you, Andy. So when you're doing it, I know it's got to be hard because you're trying to concentrate, but just talk about anything. I don't really care what you're talking about. I love to hear your thought processes a little bit, because he's so right that the creativity is out there and people just have to try to start going and venturing and doing it, and then ask for help. Like, I think if you have questions, ask him on these streams. I said, where did you get the head? Or is there a way to get this kind of head, or an arm, or a hand, or maybe an accessory, or, how'd you make the cooler or the little TV, or, he's going to give you that kind of feedback. This is not someone that doesn't want to keep this information to himself. He wants to share it with everybody. So look at Papa Pacelli's in here. Hey, Troy, thanks, man. Catch the rerun. Big fan of Andy's work. Yeah, man, it's freaking awesome, man. So, well, we want to wrap there, but I want to say thanks again to Andy for his time. He's been so gracious, and it felt like we just scratched the surface. We could just keep going because we barely got started, and time flies when you're just hanging out, having fun, man. It's like, it's nerds. It's how we are, man. We just love hanging out together and talking shops about different things. So, but thanks so much for being transparent, open with people, and such a role model. I think for that, just being creative and, being like the Uber fan of different things, and trying to share that with the world. So that's awesome. So with that, I'm going to do what I like to do here recently is I like to, let's go out with a little Bob Ross. And do a little
Ross. All I do is chill. My life is a thrill, for real, Bob Ross. I be too calm for the drama. You don't wanna cause a problem, I'll solve it, Bob Ross.